After 32 years of marriage and raising 3 sons, a kidney compatibility test for my brother revealed a shocking truth. They aren't my kids. Hello Reddit I+ here. I had always prided myself on being a good father. 32 years of marriage, 3 sons, and a life built on sacrifices and love. I believed I had done everything right. I coached their little league teams, worked overtime to afford their college tuition, and walked the tightrope of discipline and friendship with each of them. I never questioned my place in their lives, until the test. It started as an act of love. My younger brother Mark had been struggling with kidney disease for years, and when doctors told him he needed a transplant, I volunteered without hesitation. It was a no-brainer. We were brothers, sharing not just memories, but the very same blood. Or so I thought. The hospital called me in after my initial test results came back. The doctor's face was unreadable, his words careful. "Mr. Holloway, I need to ask, are you absolutely certain you and Mark are full biological siblings?" I blinked. "What? Of course I'm certain. We share the same parents." He hesitated. "Your blood work suggests otherwise. You're not a viable donor because you're not a match. In fact, your genetics indicate that you don't share a father." I felt the world tilt. It was absurd. My father had raised us both, loved us both, but the doctor's words weren't something I could ignore. I left the hospital in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. That night, as I stared at the ceiling, another horrifying thought struck me. If I had spent my whole life assuming I was my father's son and been wrong, could it be possible I had been wrong about my own sons? It took me 3 days to work up the courage to order the test kits. 3 days of trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. 3 days of staring at my wife, Elizabeth, wondering if the woman I had loved for over 3 decades had kept a secret that could shatter my world. The tests arrived. I swabbed myself and asked my sons, Michael, 30, Jason, 28, and Ryan, 25, to do the same under the pretense of curiosity about our ancestry. They laughed about it, playfully arguing over which one of them would inherit my terrible genes. I waited for the results like a man waiting for a guillotine to drop. When they finally arrived, I nearly couldn't open the email. My hands shook as I clicked through the data, my heart hammering in my chest. None of them were mine. Not one. I couldn't breathe. My stomach lurched violently, and I barely made it to the sink before I vomited. My entire life, every scraped knee I had bandaged, every bedtime story I had read, every sacrifice I had made, felt like a cruel joke. I had built my existence around a lie. I confronted Elizabeth that same night. She had just set the dinner table, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. When she turned to look at me, smiling, I held up my phone with the results displayed. "Explain this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile faltered. "What am I looking at? You tell me," I said. "Because according to this, I'm not the father of our sons." Her face went pale. She took a step back like she had been struck. "David, that's not possible. There must be some kind of mistake. Don't lie to me." My voice cracked. 32 years, Elizabeth. 32 damn years. Tell me the truth." She clutched the edge of the table as if it would keep her from collapsing. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I needed answers. She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. It was one man. Before we were married. I swear, David, I thought they were yours. I never knew." Rage roared through me, hot and merciless. "You thought? You never knew? You never questioned it in 3 decades? I never wanted to," she sobbed. "You were their father. You are their father." I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "No, Elizabeth. I was a fool who wasted his entire life on a lie. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in the house where I had raised another man's children, where my entire marriage had been based on deception. Michael, Jason, and Ryan called me repeatedly, but I ignored them. I didn't know how to face them, didn't know how to process the fact that they weren't mine, that I had spent my life loving children that weren't biologically connected to me. But then, a week later, Michael showed up at my motel room. "You didn't answer our calls," he said, his voice tight with emotion. I just stared at him, unsure of what to say. "We know," he continued. "Mom told us everything." I swallowed hard. And nothing's changed," Jason added, stepping beside his brother. "You raised us. You were there for us. You taught us everything we know about being men." Ryan, the youngest, spoke next. "You might not be our biological dad, But you're our father. That doesn't change. Tears burned my eyes. I had spent the last week feeling like I had lost everything, but standing in front of me were the very people I thought had been taken from me. I let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to move forward from this. Michael placed a firm hand on my shoulder. One step at a time, Dad. Like you always told us. Maybe biology had betrayed me. Maybe my wife had deceived me. But these were my sons, whether DNA said so or not. And I would be damned if I let this secret steal them from me. After my sons left the motel that night, I sat in silence for hours, staring at the ceiling. Their words replayed in my mind. You're our father. They had no doubts, no hesitation. I had expected anger, betrayal, maybe even rejection. But they still saw me as their dad. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one person I needed to face, the one who had lied to me from the beginning. The next morning I drove to my childhood home. My mother, Mary, answered the door with a warm smile that faded as soon as she saw my expression. David? What's wrong? She asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't move. Who's my father? Her face turned ghostly pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if scrambling for words. I had my answer before she even spoke. Why would you ask me that? She finally whispered. Because I got tested for Mark, and guess what? We don't share the same father. My voice was cold. Foreign even to me. So tell me, Mom, who is my real father? Tears welled in her eyes. David. It's complicated. No, I snapped. It's actually really simple. You either tell me the truth, or I walk out of here and never speak to you again. She sank into the nearest chair, rubbing her temples. The weight of decades of secrets seemed to press down on her shoulders. Your father, she swallowed hard, struggling. The man who raised you, he isn't your biological father. Yeah. I figured that out already, I said bitterly. So who is? She hesitated, then finally whispered a name. A man I had never met. He was an old friend. It was one mistake, and I never told anyone, not even your father. He always believed you were his, and I let him believe it. I clenched my jaw, a storm raging inside me. So you lied to him, and you lied to me. My entire damn life. She broke into quiet sobs, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I had spent over 50 years living a lie, and I wasn't about to let guilt manipulate me now. I need time, I said finally. Don't call me. I don't even know if I'll be able to forgive you. And with that, I walked out. After confronting my mother, I drove straight to the house I had built with Elizabeth, the house where I had raised our sons. But now it just felt like a house full of ghosts. Elizabeth was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked exhausted, her face pale from days of crying. I didn't care. We're getting a divorce. I didn't ease into it, didn't sugarcoat it. She flinched, as if the words physically struck her. David, please. I know I messed up. But we can get through this. We've built a life together. No, I built a life, I snapped. You built a lie. You let me believe these boys were mine. You stole my right to decide what kind of life I wanted to live. Her tears started again. But I was numb to them. I swear to you, I didn't know. Stop lying, I interrupted. You had to have known. Maybe you convinced yourself otherwise. Maybe you wanted to believe it. But deep down, you knew there was a chance. And you didn't say a damn thing. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I love you, David, she whispered. I shook my head. Number. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth 32 years ago. If you loved me, you wouldn't have stolen my chance to make my own choices. She collapsed into sobs, but I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed my things, only the essentials, clothes, documents, a few personal items. Everything else? She could keep it. I didn't want reminders of a life that had been built on deceit. As I reached the front door, she called out one last time. What about the boys? I turned, my expression softening just slightly. They're my sons. No DNA test can change that. But you're not my wife anymore. And with that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. I didn't fight over assets. I just wanted out. Elizabeth begged for reconciliation. But I was done. I moved into an apartment, started therapy, and focused on healing. My sons stood by me through it all. They made it clear that no matter what biology said, I would always be their father. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. I had been lied to, betrayed, but I wasn't broken. And for the first time in my life, I was finally free.